Okay, so we're diving into something pretty amazing today. The Turin Shroud. I mean, this thing's been around for ages.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's one of those things that you hear about, and there's just this like cloud of mystery around it, right? Like, is it real or is it not? And, we got a bunch of stuff from you, our listener, which is really cool. Um, and it seems like everyone's kind of zeroing in on how old is this thing? Like, is it really from the time of Christ, or is it, something made a few hundred years later? And a lot of that hinges on this 1988 radiocarbon dating that said, hey, this is from the Middle Ages. But then all these questions popped up after that.
Yeah, yeah. It really is amazing how this one piece of cloth has just captivated people's imaginations for centuries. And you're right, the stuff you sent over, it's incredible. Like, we've got research papers breaking down how they did that dating back in 88, looking at if they did it right. And then we have, like, historical documents talking about all these repairs they've had to do on the shroud over the years.
Right. So, I mean, right off the bat, one of the things that jumped out at me, at least from what you sent, is that this 1988 carbon dating, I mean, you'd think that would be the end of the story, right? Science said medieval, case closed. But there's a lot more to it than that. In fact, there's this one paper you sent that suggests maybe they didn't even test the right part of the shroud.
It's true. And that's the really fascinating part. The argument they're making is that those little snippets of the shroud they tested, they probably came from a section that had been repaired, maybe even multiple times over the years. And if that's the case, then they weren't looking at the original fabric at all.
Which totally makes sense when you think about it. A piece of cloth that old, it's bound to need some patching up.
Yeah.
And we're talking about historical records going back to the 1500s that talk about fixing the shroud. Plus, they're textile experts, people who really know fabrics, who've looked at it, and they've pointed out these weird inconsistencies in the weaving, almost like different threads, maybe even whole sections, were added on later.
And the thing that really supports that idea is that when they took fibers from the same corner they used for that 1988 dating, it turned out to be a mix of cotton and linen, the rest of the shroud, pure linen. So right there, you've got this big difference that points to something being off.
Yeah, like that corner has its own story, its own history, separate from the rest of the cloth. And it gets even crazier when you look at how the stitching is different in that same area.
It does, it does. And it brings up this theory they call invisible reweaving, which is pretty cool when you think about it. Like, imagine a repair so good you can't even tell it's there. And back then, in the Middle Ages or even earlier, they had these master weavers who could do things like French invisible reweaving, where they would seamlessly blend new material into the old. And so back in 88, with the technology they had, maybe they just couldn't spot these super subtle repairs, but it would totally screw up the carbon dating. Like, imagine taking your favorite old shirt to get dated, but it's got a patch on the sleeve from like 20 years ago. You're not going to get the right answer.
Yeah, you're going to get the date of the patch, not the shirt. And it wasn't just like a guess, right? I mean, one of the papers you sent talked about this chemist, Ray Rogers. He found traces of dye and this plant gum, and even evidence of spliced threads, all in that same sample they used in 1988. I mean, that seems pretty convincing that they were dealing with something that wasn't original to the shroud.
Totally. And other scientists backed him up. They did spectroscopy and looked at it under microscopes, and everything they saw just reinforced the idea that the sample was contaminated. Like, they were looking at stuff from repairs and treatments from who knows how long after the shroud was first made.
And then even if you just ignore all that, the repairs and all that,
Yeah.
there were some problems with the 1988 results themselves, just from a number standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, and this is a really important part that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. So basically, when they do carbon dating, there are these statistical tests they run to make sure the results are consistent. Makes sense. Well, the 88 results flunked some of those key tests, meaning that the samples weren't as similar as they should have been if you're trying to pinpoint a single date.
Which, again, if you think about it, lines up perfectly with the idea of repairs. If you're testing a tiny bit of cloth and some of it's old, some of it's newer, some of it's a different material altogether, your results are going to be all over the place. You're not going to get a clear picture of when the original object was made.
Exactly. So does all this prove the shroud is from Jesus's time? No, not definitively. But it definitely throws a huge wrench into that medieval dating. It opens up the possibility that it could be way, way older.
Okay, so then why not just test it again, right? Why not take samples from a part of the shroud that they think is original and use all the fancy tech we have now to get a more accurate answer?
Well, that's where things get, well, interesting. Because the Catholic Church, they've been pretty hesitant about letting scientists do more tests. And there are a few theories about why that might be.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, if it's the real deal, wouldn't they want proof? But then I thought, what if it comes back and it is medieval? And that would be a huge blow to a lot of people's faith.
Exactly right. You've got people who believe in the shroud, who see it as this holy relic, and then you've got the potential to shatter that belief. But what if it's even older? What if it goes back further than the time of Jesus? I mean, that throws a whole other set of questions into the mix.
And then there's the image itself, right? Like,
Mm.
what if scientists find something about how it was made, something we can't explain, maybe even something that seems impossible based on what we know about, science and physics and all that. I mean, that could really shake things up.
It would be a huge deal. And not to mention the very real concern that testing could damage the shroud. I mean, it's old, it's delicate, and even with all our advanced technology, there's always a risk. And from the church's perspective, they're entrusted with preserving it, right?
But, I mean, by not letting scientists do more tests, it just makes people wonder even more. It's like, are they hiding something? Do they know something they're not telling us? That kind of thing.
It definitely fuels speculation, that's for sure. But getting back to the image itself, you sent some stuff about the theory that it's like some kind of ancient photograph, an imprint from some sort of intense light, maybe even connected to the resurrection.
I know. It's crazy to think about, right? This idea that something happened, some burst of energy maybe, and it left this image behind.
What gets me is that it's not a painting or a drawing. Scientists have analyzed it, and it's actually this super subtle change in the fibers of the linen itself. And the thing is, when you look at it, it's like a photographic negative. The lights and darks are reversed. And photography wasn't invented for centuries after the time of Jesus. That's a head scratcher for sure. Like, how did they do that?
And I remember reading about scientists trying to recreate the image, right? Like using lasers and stuff.
Hmm.
But no one's been able to perfectly match it.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so intriguing. They can get close, but there's always something off. The level of detail in the face, the way it looks 3D when you view it as a negative, even the way the discoloration interacts with the fabric itself. It's like, if it's a fake, then whoever made it had some serious skills. And I mean, skills that we don't even fully understand today.
So it all just leads to this bigger question,
Yeah.
right? Like, who decides what's true? Who's in charge of the story? Because this whole thing, the shroud, it's not just about a piece of cloth. It's about belief. It's about history. It's about power, really.
It really is. And it makes you think, right? Like when we talk about the church, it's easy to picture this like monolithic thing, but it's not. It's people. It's different groups, different ideas, different levels of power.
Yeah. And it's not just the church either. Like, think about it. Governments, religious leaders from all sorts of faiths,
Yeah.
maybe even some secret group with ancient knowledge we don't even know about.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even, and I know this sounds out there, but maybe even something not human,
It is out there, but that's what's so cool about this. The shroud makes you think about all those possibilities, and it comes down to if someone is controlling the story, why? What are they hiding? What don't they want us to know?
And it makes you wonder, what is real? What if everything we think we know is just like a carefully crafted story? I mean, what if we're living in a simulation, right? Or what if there are dimensions we can't perceive? Or, I don't know, time travel, consciousness transfer, like all these things that seem impossible.
See, it's a rabbit hole for sure. But the heart of it is that knowledge is power. And whoever controls the information controls the story. And that's a question that's bigger than the shroud, bigger than any of us, really.
All right, so before we go too far down that rabbit hole, can we just like sum up what we've learned today about the shroud?
Yeah, for sure. So, biggest thing is that the 1988 carbon dating, probably wrong. They likely tested a piece that had been repaired, and that threw everything off. So, we still don't really know how old the shroud is.
And the Catholic Church, well, they're being very careful about letting anyone do more testing. And there are good reasons for that, like protecting people's faith, protecting the shroud itself, but it also just adds to the mystery, right?
It does, it does. And until they do more tests on a part of the shroud that they're sure hasn't been messed with, using all the high-tech stuff we have now, it's all just theories. The shroud, it's a historical artifact, but it's also maybe something much, much more, something we don't fully understand.
All right, so here's something for you, our listener, to think about. If there are people, organizations, or even something else entirely out there, shaping the stories we believe, what else might we have wrong? I mean, what other things that we think are true might actually be, well, not the whole story. It's a question that goes way beyond the shroud. And it makes you wonder, what if everything's not what it seems?